4:30 a.m., meditation. 5:15 a.m., check on the children. 7:30 a.m., breakfast, special diet. 9 a.m., dance practice. 12 p.m., private lessons. 4 p.m., studio. 7 p.m., family time. Michael Jackson's secretly guarded daily schedule reveals the unseen side of the king of pop's life away from the bright lights. If these kinds of stories catch your attention, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Where are you watching us from right now? Let us know in the comments below. For millions of fans across the globe, Michael Jackson was the electrifying performer who glided backward across stages, the pioneering artist who transformed music videos into short films, the record-breaking musician whose albums defined generations. But what happened when the spotlights dimmed and the curtains closed? What was life like for the man behind the moonwalk when he stepped away from the world's gaze and into the private spaces of his everyday existence? The daily routine of Michael Jackson, his habits, preferences, schedule, and private rituals, remained one of the most closely guarded aspects of his life. While the public knew his music intimately and recognized his iconic costumes and dance moves instantly, the mechanics of his day-to-day life remained largely hidden from view, shrouded in speculation, rumor, and occasional glimpses offered by those in his inner circle. By piecing together accounts from his household staff, security personnel, family members, and close associates who spent significant time with him behind closed doors, we can reconstruct a picture of Michael Jackson's daily life away from the stage, a portrait that reveals a man both extraordinary and mundane, whose private habits sometimes aligned with his public persona and sometimes dramatically contradicted it. People think they knew Michael from what they saw on stage or in interviews, but that was just one dimension, says Bill Whitfield, who served as Jackson's head of security during the last 2.5 years of his life and co-authored the book, Remember the Time, Protecting Michael Jackson in His Final Days. The Michael we saw day to day was a different person in many ways, more normal in some respects, more unusual in others. Perhaps the most surprising aspect of Jackson's daily routine was his sleep schedule, which defied conventional patterns and reflected his creative rhythms. Contrary to many celebrities who keep vampire hours, Jackson was often an early riser, though this was frequently because he had never gone to sleep the night before rather than because he awakened early from a full night's rest. Michael suffered from chronic insomnia, explains Dr. Charles Cheesler, the Harvard sleep specialist who was prepared to testify during the wrongful death trial against Jackson's concert promoter AEG Live. He often went days with little or no sleep, particularly during creative periods or when he was preparing for performances. During these periods of sleeplessness, Jackson would often use the quiet pre-dawn hours for meditation and reflection, a practice he had maintained since his conversion to Islam, although he incorporated elements from various spiritual traditions. This meditation often took place in his bedroom or in special meditation spaces he created in his homes, particularly at Neverland Ranch. Karen Fay, Jackson's longtime makeup artist and friend, recalls, he would sit in complete stillness sometimes, eyes closed, barely breathing in a noticeable way. He told me once that this was when he felt most at peace, when the world was quiet and no demands were being made of him. Following these periods of meditation, particularly after he became a father, Jackson would often check on his children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, now known as BG, while they slept. This pre-dawn ritual was noted by several household staff members as a regular practice, reflecting Jackson's deep devotion to his children. He would just stand in their doorways and watch them sleeping, recalls one nanny who worked for the family. Sometimes for several minutes, not disturbing them, just watching. It seemed to give him enormous comfort. This pattern of late-night wakefulness followed by early morning activities created an unusual rhythm to Jackson's days that often confused new staff members. His chief security officer Bill Whitfield noted that Jackson would frequently be awake and active when the security shift changed at 4 or 5 a.m., then would disappear to sleep during the late morning or early afternoon, only to emerge again in the late afternoon or evening. When Jackson did sleep, his sleeping arrangements were themselves unusual. After the 1993 allegations of inappropriate behavior with children, Jackson began sleeping in a special chamber, sometimes described as a hyperbaric oxygen chamber, though this specific detail has been disputed by those close to him. What is confirmed by multiple sources is that Jackson often slept with the room quite cold, sometimes as low as 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and with oxygen tanks nearby, which he believed helped his vocal health and overall well-being. His bed was typically surrounded by books. Jackson was an avid reader with a collection that reportedly exceeded 10,000 volumes, and notebooks in which he would jot down song ideas, sketches, and personal reflections. Many of these notebooks were found after his death, revealing the depth of his creative process and private thoughts. Morning routines, when Jackson did observe them, typically began with a carefully planned breakfast prepared according to specific dietary requirements. Contrary to public perception that he barely ate, Jackson maintained a structured diet designed by nutritionists, though his actual adherence to these plans varied considerably. He was very particular about his food, remembers Kai Chase, who served as Jackson's personal chef during his final years. Everything had to be organic, fresh, and prepared without certain spices or additives. But he also had a tremendous sweet tooth that sometimes overrode the healthy eating plan. A typical breakfast might include fresh fruit, granola, almond milk, and protein, often egg whites or a protein shake prepared to his specifications. Chase recalls that strawberries were a particular favorite, and Jackson insisted they be washed thoroughly, sometimes requiring them to be washed 7 times before being served. This breakfast would often be eaten alone or with his children, rather than with the staff or associates who might be present at the house. Despite his fame, Jackson maintained a relatively small household staff compared to many celebrities of his stature, typically including a housekeeper, cook, nanny for the children, tutor, and personal assistant, in addition to security personnel who generally remained outside the main living areas. Following breakfast, if he wasn't deep in a recording or touring project, Jackson would often engage in dance practice, a daily discipline he maintained throughout his career. Even during periods when he had no specific performances scheduled, he would spend hours refining his technique, learning new movements, or simply dancing for the pure joy of expression. Dancing wasn't just his job, it was his language, observes choreographer Travis Payne, who worked with Jackson on numerous projects, including the planned "This Is It" tour. Even when there was no professional reason to practice, he danced daily. It was like breathing for him. This practice would typically take place in a designated dance space. At Neverland, this was a fully equipped dance studio, while at rental properties, rooms would be temporarily converted by removing furniture and installing portable dance floors and mirrors. Jackson would often dance alone, though sometimes with a small number of professional dancers or choreographers if he was working on specific routines. The music that accompanied these private dance sessions revealed another aspect of Jackson's character that surprised many new to his inner circle. While the public might have expected him to dance to his own hits or contemporary pop, Jackson's private dance soundtrack was extraordinarily diverse, ranging from classical compositions to Bollywood soundtracks, African rhythms to classic jazz. His musical knowledge was encyclopedic, says Brad Buxer, Jackson's longtime musical director. He would be dancing 1 minute to Debussy, the next to James Brown, the next to something from India that none of us had ever heard before. His influences were truly global. By midday, Jackson's schedule would often include some form of education, either his own ongoing learning or, after he became a father, involvement in his children's education. Jackson was famously self-conscious about his own limited formal education, having been thrust into professional performing from such an early age, and he compensated by becoming a voracious autodidact. He was constantly learning, recalls Jackson's spiritual advisor, Rabbi Shmuley Batich. He read everything: history, philosophy, art, science. He had tutors come in to teach him various subjects. He was determined that his lack of formal schooling wouldn't limit his knowledge. This commitment to education extended to his children, whose schooling was a top priority for Jackson. Rather than sending them to traditional schools, where he feared they would be targeted for their association with him, Jackson created a homeschool environment with professional teachers coming to the residence. The children had a very structured education, confirms one tutor who worked with the Jackson children. Michael was involved in planning their curriculum and would often sit in on lessons. He was particularly insistent about history, literature, and the arts being central to their education. The afternoons in Jackson's daily life were typically his most professionally productive time. If he was working on an album, he would often be in the studio from early afternoon until late into the night. If preparing for a tour or video, this time would be devoted to more intensive rehearsals with his full team of dancers, musicians, and creative directors. Even during periods when he wasn't actively recording or preparing for performances, Jackson maintained a creative schedule, working on song ideas, sketching costume concepts, or discussing business ventures with his team. The image of Jackson as primarily an intuitive performer underestimates the degree of detailed work and planning that went into his creative process. Michael was meticulous about every aspect of his art, explains longtime producer Teddy Riley. People think of him as this spontaneous, instinctual performer, and he was that too, but he was also incredibly detail-oriented and involved in every decision. Nothing was too small for his attention. This professional focus would continue until early evening, when Jackson would typically shift to family time. Dinner with his children was a priority whenever possible, and Jackson was considerably more involved in their daily care than many might have assumed, given his professional demands and celebrity status. He was a hands-on dad, insists Kai Chase. He helped with homework, played games with them, read them stories. It wasn't all left to nannies, which surprised me when I first started working there. He was very much present in their lives. The evenings would often include what Jackson called movie time, screenings of films either in the private theaters he had installed in his homes or, in temporary residences, on large-screen televisions in living areas. Jackson's film tastes were eclectic, ranging from Disney animations, a consistent favorite, to classic films from the 1930s and 40s, to contemporary blockbusters. Movie nights were special, recalls Whitfield. The kids would get to stay up late, there would be popcorn and candy, and Michael would be like a big kid himself, totally engrossed in the films. It was one of the times he seemed most relaxed. As the children's bedtime approached, Jackson would oversee their nighttime routine, often reading them stories, sometimes from books, sometimes invented from his imagination. Those who witnessed these moments described them as among Jackson's happiest and most natural, when the superstar seemed to shed his public persona entirely and simply be a father engaged in the universal ritual of tucking children into bed. Once the children were asleep, Jackson's night would often begin in earnest. This was frequently when he would make phone calls, sometimes to business associates, but often to his small circle of close friends, conversations that could last for hours and continue well into the early morning. He was a night owl and so am I, so he would call me at 2 or 3 a.m., and we would talk about everything, art, politics, spirituality, childhood memories, recalls actress Elizabeth Taylor in a 2009 interview shortly after Jackson's death. Taylor was one of Jackson's closest friends and confidants for many years. These nighttime hours were also when Jackson would often return to creative work, writing lyrics, recording vocal ideas into a dictaphone, or sketching concepts for videos or stage performances. Many of his most innovative ideas reportedly came during these solitary late-night sessions, when the world was quiet and his imagination could roam freely. This general pattern, early morning spiritual practice, daytime professional work, evening family time, late-night creativity and connection, formed the backbone of Jackson's daily life, though it was frequently modified by his professional obligations, travel schedule, and health status. What emerges from this reconstruction of Jackson's daily routine is a portrait more complex than either the superhuman performer or the eccentric recluse portrayed in much of the media coverage during his lifetime. Instead, we see a man of contradictions, disciplined yet spontaneous, family-oriented yet solitary, accessible to his children yet mysterious to the world. One of the most striking aspects of Jackson's private life was his relationship with technology and communication. Despite being one of the most famous people on the planet, Jackson maintained an unusual level of technological isolation. He rarely used email, did not engage with social media, which was in its early stages during his final years, and primarily communicated via landline phones or through intermediaries. He was both connected to and disconnected from the world, observes Whitfield. He knew what was going on, he read newspapers, watched news, but he engaged with it all at a distance, through filters he controlled. This selective connection to the outside world extended to his relationship with his own fame. Jackson maintained elaborate security protocols, rarely ventured into public without disguises, and went to extraordinary lengths to create private experiences of ordinary activities. One of the most illuminating examples of this was his approach to shopping, an activity most people take for granted but which was logistically complex for someone of his fame. Jackson would arrange for stores to be opened after hours exclusively for him, allowing him to browse and shop without being recognized or mobbed by fans. He loved shopping, recalls Jackson's friend and dermatologist Dr. Arnold Klein. But it couldn't be normal shopping. Stores would close, staff would stay late, and he could have the experience of browsing like a regular person, which he craved. These private shopping excursions revealed another aspect of Jackson's character that contradicted his public image. Despite cultivating an almost otherworldly persona on stage, he had decidedly ordinary tastes in many respects. He enjoyed browsing in bookstores, toy stores, and antique shops, often purchasing items that caught his eye without regard for their value or exclusivity. He wasn't a typical wealthy shopper looking only for luxury brands, notes one retail manager who hosted several of Jackson's private shopping sessions. He was more interested in things that caught his imagination, a vintage toy, an unusual book, artwork that spoke to him. His selections were personal, not status-driven. This combination of extraordinary privilege, having stores open privately, and ordinary taste, the actual items purchased, characterized much of Jackson's private life. He had the resources to live in almost unimaginable luxury, and in some ways he did. His homes were filled with expensive antiques, rare art, and custom furnishings. But interspersed with these valuable items were toys, stuffed animals, arcade games, and other whimsical elements that reflected his attempts to reclaim the childhood he felt had been sacrificed to his early career. Jackson's relationship with food followed a similar pattern of underlying normalcy overlaid with unusual specifics. While his diet was carefully planned and prepared by professional chefs, his actual food preferences were surprisingly simple. He enjoyed comfort foods, Mexican dishes, fried chicken, hamburgers, though prepared with organic ingredients and according to his specific requirements. People assume celebrities all want fancy gourmet food, says Chase. Michael liked fairly simple dishes but was particular about their preparation. His favorite meals weren't that different from what many people enjoy, but the process of creating them had to follow certain rules. Those rules included a preference for food prepared without pork products, reflecting both health concerns and religious influences, minimal spices, no garlic, and organic ingredients whenever possible. Jackson also maintained a list of specific brands he preferred for certain items, particular types of bread, specific brands of peanut butter or hot sauce that he enjoyed. His most famous dietary preference was perhaps his fondness for sweets, particularly candy and desserts. Jackson kept candy dishes throughout his residences and often traveled with his favorite sweets. According to those close to him, this preference for sugary foods wasn't simply a taste preference but connected to the childhood experiences he felt he had missed. Candy represented something he hadn't been allowed much of as a child performing with his brothers, explains one longtime associate. Having bowls of candy around, being able to eat dessert whenever he wanted, these were symbols of the freedom and choice he didn't have growing up. Jackson's health regimen beyond diet was similarly contradictory. On one hand, he was a disciplined dancer who maintained a level of physical fitness that allowed for his demanding performances well into his 40s. He worked with personal trainers at various points and understood the physical requirements of his profession. On the other hand, he struggled with chronic pain issues stemming from both performance injuries, particularly a back injury sustained during a 1999 concert when a bridge collapsed, and the burn injuries to his scalp suffered during the infamous 1984 Pepsi commercial accident. These pain issues led to his use of prescription medications, which would eventually play a role in his death. Dr. Klein, who treated Jackson for many years, notes the complexity of his health situation. Michael was extremely health conscious in many ways, particular about what he ate, committed to maintaining his physical abilities as a dancer, but he also had genuine medical issues that required management. The public perception often missed this contradiction. Another aspect of Jackson's daily life that differed significantly from public perception was his engagement with nature and outdoor activities. Despite being frequently portrayed as someone who preferred to remain indoors, Jackson actually spent considerable time outside when in environments where he felt secure from public intrusion. At Neverland Ranch, he would often walk the grounds, visit the animals in his private zoo, and spend time in the gardens he had meticulously designed. Even in temporary residences, he sought properties with private outdoor spaces where he could spend time in the fresh air without risk of being photographed or approached. He loved being outside, confirms Whitfield. It just had to be in controlled settings where he felt safe. He would spend hours in gardens or parks when we could arrange private access. Nature revitalized him. This need for controlled environments extended to virtually every aspect of Jackson's life and represented one of the central paradoxes of his existence. He craved normalcy but could never experience it normally. Whether shopping, dining at restaurants, visiting theme parks, or even taking his children to movies, every activity required elaborate security arrangements, disguises, and often the exclusive use of facilities that would normally be public. Michael would say, "I just want to do what regular people do," recalls Frank Caschio, a longtime friend of Jackson's, in his memoir. But there was no regular way for him to do regular things. Everything had to be arranged, negotiated, planned. Spontaneity wasn't really possible. This lack of spontaneity extended to his social life as well. While Jackson maintained a small circle of close friends, including Elizabeth Taylor, Macaulay Culkin, and a few others who understood the peculiar pressures of fame, his daily interactions were primarily with staff, family members, and business associates rather than casual friendships. Making friends was complicated for him, explains Rabbi Batich. He never knew if people wanted to be close to him for who he was or for what he represented: access, opportunity, money. So he was simultaneously lonely for connection and wary of it. This wariness translated into elaborate vetting processes for anyone who entered Jackson's inner circle. New staff members were required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements, underwent background checks, and were often initially limited in their access to Jackson himself until they had proven their trustworthiness over time. The physical spaces in which Jackson lived reflected both his fame and his desire for privacy. His residences were typically large, secluded properties with extensive security features, high walls, surveillance systems, security gates, and guard houses. Within these secure perimeters, he created environments that combined luxury, functionality, and elements of fantasy. Neverland Ranch, his most famous residence, exemplified this approach. The 2,700-acre property featured formal gardens, a private amusement park complete with functioning rides, a zoo, multiple guest houses, and a 13,000-square-foot main house. The interior of the main house combined museum-quality art and antiques with children's toys, arcade games, and candy machines, a physical manifestation of the dual nature of Jackson's persona. Neverland wasn't just a home, it was a statement, observes music journalist Steve Knopper, author of MJ, The Genius of Michael Jackson. It represented everything Michael wanted to create: beauty, innocence, freedom, play, art. It was his vision of paradise. After leaving Neverland following his 2005 trial and acquittal on child molestation charges, Jackson lived in a series of rental properties around the world: Bahrain, Ireland, Las Vegas, and finally Los Angeles. These temporary homes lacked the personalized features of Neverland but were always modified to accommodate his specific needs and preferences. Even in rental properties, certain things were non-negotiable, notes Whitfield. Space for the children to play, privacy from outside view, security features, and room for his books and music equipment. Everything else could be adapted. One constant across all his residences was the presence of music. Jackson typically had music playing throughout his homes, not his own music, which he rarely listened to outside of professional contexts, but a diverse playlist reflecting his broad musical tastes. Classical music was often played in the mornings, while world music, R&B, jazz, and various other genres might be featured throughout the day. The house was rarely silent, recalls Chase. Music was like the backdrop to everything, always playing somewhere in the background. It created the atmosphere he wanted to live in. Another consistent element was the presence of books. Jackson's reading habits were legendary among those who knew him, and bookshelves were prominent features in all his residences. His tastes ranged from biographies to poetry, art books to science texts, self-help to spiritual writings. He read voraciously, confirms Lisa Marie Presley, Jackson's first wife, in a post-divorce interview. That surprised me when I first got to know him. The public image didn't capture his intelligence or how much he educated himself through reading. This self-education extended to art as well. Jackson collected art throughout his adult life, focusing particularly on 19th-century European works, Renaissance-inspired pieces, and portraits of children. His collection, worth millions, reflected both his personal aesthetic and his ongoing effort to surround himself with beauty and innocence. The daily rhythm of Jackson's household was significantly altered after he became a father. Prince was born in 1997, Paris in 1998, and Prince Michael II, Blanket/BG, in 2002, and their presence transformed Jackson's priorities and schedule. By all accounts from those who worked in his household during this period, Jackson embraced fatherhood enthusiastically and made his children the center of his private life. Everything revolved around the kids, confirms one nanny who worked for the family. Their schedules, their needs, their activities, these became the organizing principles of the household. Michael adjusted his own routine to maximize his time with them. This adjustment included scheduling his professional work during their school hours when possible, being present for meals and bedtime, and creating activities and experiences designed specifically for their enjoyment. While nannies and household staff assisted with childcare, Jackson was directly involved in major parenting decisions and spent significant time personally engaging with his children. The education of the children was a particular focus. Jackson arranged for tutors and teachers to provide a comprehensive homeschool education, with a curriculum that emphasized not only traditional academic subjects but also art, music, and cultural history. He personally supervised many of their lessons and supplemented formal instruction with his own teachings about music, dance, and creative expression. He wanted them to have the education he never had, explains one family associate. He was determined they would be knowledgeable about the world, about history, about art, all the things he had to learn on his own as an adult. The children's daily routine was considerably more structured than Jackson's own, with regular meal times, study periods, recreational activities, and bedtimes. This structure provided stability within the unusual circumstances of their lives as the children of one of the world's most famous people. Jackson's approach to parenting reflected both his own childhood experiences and his determination to give his children what he felt he had missed. While maintaining discipline and expectations, he deliberately avoided the harsh methods his own father had employed, focusing instead on encouragement, positive reinforcement, and nurturing the children's individual interests and talents. He was determined to break the cycle, observes Rabbi Batich, who spent considerable time with Jackson and his children. He would say, "I want my children to have what I didn't have, a childhood." That guided his parenting philosophy. This commitment to providing a normal childhood within decidedly abnormal circumstances led to some of the more unusual aspects of Jackson's parenting that attracted public attention, such as having his children wear masks or veils in public to protect their privacy. While these measures seemed extreme to outside observers, those close to the family understood them as Jackson's attempt to shield his children from the fame that had so complicated his own life. The masks weren't about hiding the children, insists Whitfield. They were about giving them the choice to reveal themselves on their own terms when they were old enough to make that decision. Michael saw it as protection, not concealment. Within the private spaces of their homes, the children did not wear masks, and Jackson worked to create environments where they could experience elements of typical childhood despite their extraordinary circumstances. He arranged playdates with other children, created celebrations for birthdays and holidays, and established family traditions that provided consistency amid the changes in their living situations after leaving Neverland. As the children grew older, Jackson increasingly involved them in his creative process, allowing them to visit recording studios, observe dance rehearsals, and understand the professional aspects of his life. This integration of his parental and professional roles represented an evolution in his daily routine, a merging of the different aspects of his identity that had often seemed compartmentalized earlier in his career. The final years of Jackson's life, leading up to his death in June 2009 at age 50, saw significant changes in his daily routine as financial pressures, health challenges, and preparations for his planned This Is It concert series in London created new demands and constraints. The relatively stable patterns of his life as a father and artist became increasingly disrupted by external pressures and obligations. During this period, Jackson's insomnia worsened, leading to his fateful relationship with Dr. Conrad Murray and the propofol treatments that would ultimately cause his death. His financial situation became increasingly precarious, forcing him to consider commercial opportunities he might previously have declined. The immense pressure of the planned 50-concert series at London's O2 Arena added physical and psychological stress to his already complicated life. Yet even during this challenging final chapter, many of the essential elements of Jackson's daily life remained consistent: his devotion to his children, his creative discipline, his search for moments of normalcy within his extraordinary circumstances. Those closest to him during this period describe a man who, despite mounting pressures, maintained the core rituals and relationships that had defined his private existence for years. Looking at Jackson's daily life over the course of his adult years reveals patterns that help us understand the man behind the myth. Beyond the spectacle of his public performances and the sensationalism of media coverage, there existed a daily reality that was simultaneously more ordinary and more complex than most realized. He was a disciplined artist who approached his craft with meticulous attention to detail. He was a devoted father who prioritized his children's well-being and development. He was a seeker who explored spirituality, art, and knowledge through various paths and practices. He was a man of contradictions who craved both connection and solitude, structure and spontaneity, privacy and recognition. The routines and habits that structured his days, from early morning meditation to late-night creative sessions, from family meals to private shopping excursions, reflect the multifaceted nature of his identity and his ongoing attempts to balance the extraordinary demands of his public role with his desire for personal fulfillment and normalcy. In the years since his death, the public image of Michael Jackson has continued to evolve, shaped by posthumous documentaries, legal proceedings, new music releases, and shifting cultural perspectives. Yet for those who were part of his daily life, the staff who maintained his homes, the security team who protected his privacy, the friends who shared his private moments, the Michael they remember exists independently of these public narratives. They remember a man who began his days checking on his sleeping children, who danced alone for the pure joy of movement, who read voraciously and listened intently, who sought beauty and knowledge with equal passion. They remember not just the king of pop, but Michael Jackson the person, complex, contradictory, and ultimately human in his daily existence away from the spotlight's glare. The schedule that framed his days, meditation at dawn, time with his children, creative work, rare moments of ordinary pleasure, tells a more nuanced story than either the glorification or vilification that has characterized much of the public discourse about Jackson. It reveals a life lived at the improbable intersection of extraordinary fame and ordinary human needs, of public performance and private searching. When the microphones were turned off and the world looked away, this was the reality of Michael Jackson's daily life, not the caricature of eccentricity often portrayed in tabloids, nor the flawless icon presented in official narratives, but a man navigating the unprecedented circumstances of his existence one day at a time, seeking balance between the extraordinary demands of being Michael Jackson and the universal human desire to simply be himself.